Hi, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Whole Potato Podcast. I am Christian, your podcast host, and I'm not going to lie, I am so scared right now, but I am going to continue on anyways. So I wanted to share today a little bit of the story of the whole potato. If you haven't heard that before, if you are close to me, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And then also just kind of why this podcast is beginning and what God's been laying on my heart recently. The whole potato is a story from almost 3 years ago, which is wild that it's already been 3 years. But about 3 years ago in the fall, I had a dream. And in my dream, I'm a gardener, so I love to garden. In my dream, I was taking these tiny little slices of the potato and I was putting it in the soil. And a woman approached me and she said, "You need to put in the whole potato." And I said, "No, I think these little slices will do. This is fine." And she said, "No, the whole potato." And for whatever reason, I looked at her and I said, "I'm scared." And she smiled and said, "The whole potato." And so I plunged this big potato into the soil. And when I looked up, I was standing in the most incredible garden ever, with just incredible produce. And I was walking around and I was so in awe of everything I was seeing. And I said, "Wow, whose garden is this?" And I heard the woman's voice from afar and she said, "It's yours." And I said, "No, this isn't mine. I didn't do this work. I don't remember planting any of these things. I don't remember watering or taking care of this. This is not my garden." And she said, "You planted the whole potato. God did the rest." And when I woke up from that dream, I remember thinking that meant something. And to this day, I can still see the dream vividly in my head, every single detail. And I just thought it meant something. And I texted a few friends, and one of my friends, Emily, replied and she said, "Christian, I think God's preparing you for something. And whatever it is, you're going to have to go all in, the whole potato." Now, for my gardeners out there, I do want to preface and say I am aware that you can cut chunks of potato with eyes to grow potatoes. So I'm not trying to give gardening advice, but for me, I had to plant the whole potato. And I think honestly, that's like a whole other lesson if I really think about it, but we're not going to go there today. But this whole potato dream was just the beginning of a crazy adventure because just a few months later, I would be sitting in my church hearing my pastor do a sermon on radical obedience and trusting God and doing what he asks. And in that moment, I would be asked to step away from my dream job and wait for instructions. And that was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, but it has brought the biggest blessings because now I'm the founder and executive director of a nonprofit ministry that equips disciples with intellectual and developmental disabilities. My heart has always loved God and my friends with disabilities, and I think that's just been a big part of who I am for a very long time. But these past 3 years, I feel like my love for the Lord has grown so much, and I just feel a deeper connection than I ever have. And I'm so grateful for that. And so as I continue to walk with Christ and as I continue to be obedient in what he's called me to in this ministry, one of the things that God really laid on my heart was the idea of a podcast. Now, for some of you who think I'm a bit extroverted and love to talk, you may think, of course, you want to do a podcast. But actually, this really scares me. This isn't something that makes me feel very comfortable. Years ago, I did try to do a podcast for a little bit, and I quit after a few episodes because I thought, this is not good. Nobody wants to listen to this, and this just has no purpose. But this has really been something that's been on my heart for months, and I think, in fact, something I say a lot is delayed obedience is disobedience. And to be quite honest and vulnerable with you, I think I have had some serious delayed/disobedience to this call. And so I was talking to some mentors yesterday, and I just realized that it's just time. And I'm not going to wait until everything's perfect or I have a perfect little studio. I'm going to sit in my chair in my little corner of my kitchen. And I'm just going to start sharing what God has been putting on my heart and interviewing some people who I think walk out radical obedience so well. And I'm just going to see what God does with this, because I think that's what God asks of us, is that we just trust him and we start walking, and we don't have to know all the plans and we don't have to do it perfectly. We just have to obey and trust that God will continue to provide. And so that is what I'm doing with this podcast. Truly, when I think about what I hope to really do with this podcast. I really have a heart for families within the disability community. I love my friends with disabilities, but I also love their parents and their grandparents and their siblings and their friends and all the other support networks that are there. And I think something that the church overall can do such a better job at is including, encouraging, and equipping people with disabilities and their families. About 90% of American churches do not have any kind of disability ministry set up in their churches. And I just think that's so sad because there's 7.39 million individuals with an intellectual or developmental disability. And then you count all the family members that they might have, and you realize that there are so many people who do not walk into church or who do not feel encouraged or included in a church. And I think that has to change. And something on my heart is the revival of families in the disability community and the revival of churches across our nation to truly include people with disabilities, share the gospel, and equip disciples. As we move forward and I'm interviewing different guests or talking on different subjects, really my hope is that families and the disability community would just find this podcast as a safe place where they can feel encouraged, where they can be challenged, and they can just know that there is someone here. In fact, there's lots of people who love them, who care deeply about them, and who know the great impact that they also have for the kingdom. And I just think it's time to help our families and our individuals with disabilities rise up and be all that God called them to be, and be respected and seen for all that God has called them to be. And so that's my heart. That's kind of the mission of this podcast. And again, I don't know how far it's going to go or how long it's going to last, but I am just trusting God with this. I'm stepping into radical obedience. He has never let me down before, and I don't think he's going to start now. So this is a really short episode, and my child is in the background, but thank you so much for just tuning in. I'm so excited. I've already got a few interviews lined up, and I think you are just going to love hearing from these people. I hope this is encouraging to you. I hope you'll share it with a friend, and that your life will be blessed by the Whole Potato Podcast. Bye.